Apache woman trapped. She thought he was going to kill her, but Cowboy made her his wife. The sun was beginning its slow descent behind the jagged cliffs of the southwestern desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Dust rose from the dry earth with every whisper of wind, and the scent of sagebrush hung heavily in the air. Amid this rugged landscape, a young Apache woman moved carefully along a narrow trail that wound between steep rock formations. Her eyes, sharp and alert, scanned the land for any signs of danger. She had been traveling alone for days, carrying only a small pack with the essentials she needed to survive: water, food, and a few personal items of great importance to her. Though she was skilled and experienced in navigating the harsh terrain, she could not shake the sense that something was watching her. She paused for a moment on the trail, crouching behind a rock to take in the surroundings. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, a mix of jagged stones, prickly cacti, and the occasional twisted tree that had somehow managed to survive in this unforgiving place. She listened intently, her ears catching the faintest sound of movement in the distance. There it was, a soft rustle, a sound almost swallowed by the wind. Her hand instinctively went to the small knife at her belt, the blade polished and ready. Suddenly, a figure emerged from behind a boulder ahead of her. At first, she thought it was one of the bandits she had been warned about in the nearby settlements. Beth. Her heart leapt into her throat. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, and clothed in the worn, dusty garb of a cowboy. His hat was pulled low over his eyes, and the leather of his boots creaked softly as he stepped forward. She froze, unsure of his intentions. Stories she had grown up hearing painted men like him as dangerous outsiders, people who would take advantage of anyone who crossed their path. Her body tensed, ready to flee or defend herself. The cowboy raised a hand, not in aggression, but in a gesture that seemed to signal peace. "Hey there," he called gently, his voice rough but not unkind. "Don't be afraid. I'm not here to hurt you." She narrowed her eyes, studying him carefully. His eyes were sharp, observing her as intently as she observed him. She did not lower her hand from the knife. "Why should I trust you?" she asked, her voice firm, betraying none of the fear she felt. "Because," he said slowly, "I'm the only one here who can help you. You're in danger, and you don't even know it yet." She hesitated. There was a flicker of uncertainty in her mind. Was this man telling the truth, or was he trying to lure her into a trap? Every instinct she had screamed to run, to disappear into the rocky terrain and find safety on her own. But the worry that someone or something might be waiting further down the trail made her pause. Her curiosity, and perhaps a small spark of hope, made her stay just long enough to listen. "Danger?" she repeated cautiously. "What kind of danger?" The cowboy glanced behind him, scanning the cliffs and the winding path. "There are people who don't take kindly to travelers passing through here," he said. "I've been tracking a small group for the last few miles. They've been following this trail, looking for anyone alone."
"You're lucky I spotted them first."
Her breath caught in her throat. Bandits! The very thing she had feared. And yet, here was a man claiming to protect her. She wanted to believe him, but the instinct to survive outweighed any desire for companionship. "I can take care of myself," she said, her voice steady, though her pulse raced. The cowboy smiled faintly, as if he understood completely.
"I can see that."
"Bet. You're strong and capable, but even the strongest people need help sometimes." Before she could respond, a sharp noise echoed from the rocks above them, a snapping branch, a faint shuffle. Her eyes darted upward. Figures emerged from the shadows, moving quickly and silently. 3 men, rough-looking and armed, were making their way toward her. But her hand tightened around the knife, and fear surged through her like electricity. This was it, the moment she had feared the most. The cowboy stepped closer, positioning himself between her and the men. He didn't draw a weapon at first, but his stance was protective, firm and unyielding. "Stay behind me," he said calmly, his eyes never leaving the approaching threat. She obeyed instinctively, her body pressed against the rough fabric of his coat. She could feel the heat radiating from him, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, and it gave her a strange sense of reassurance. The men moved closer, their faces twisted with intent and cruelty, but the cowboy's presence seemed to make them hesitate. "Now!" he shouted, reaching for a rifle slung across his back. The sound of the weapon being cocked made the bandits pause, their confidence faltering. He aimed carefully, not recklessly, ensuring he could protect both himself and the woman without causing unnecessary harm. The confrontation was brief but tense. The bandits, realizing they were outmatched and unprepared for resistance, chose to retreat rather than risk a fight. They melted back into the shadows, leaving only dust and the echo of their footsteps behind. For a moment, the desert was silent again. The woman's legs trembled slightly, not from exhaustion but from the adrenaline that still coursed through her veins. She lowered her knife slowly, though her eyes never left the cowboy. You saved my life," she said softly, the words barely audible over her racing heartbeat. He nodded, lowering the rifle and giving her a reassuring look.
I did. You were in real danger back there.
She wanted to say something more, to ask him why he had risked himself for a stranger, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she simply stared at him, trying to read his intentions. "Chris, was he a man who could be trusted, or was this just another trick?" "I know you don't trust easily," he said gently. "And you shouldn't. But sometimes the right person shows up at the right time. Today, that person happened to be me." She looked at him, really looked, for the first time. There was a quiet strength in his eyes, a sincerity that was hard to ignore. He wasn't boastful or arrogant. He didn't act like he had the world at his feet. He was just a man, standing there, offering help without asking for anything in return. Slowly, she nodded, acknowledging his words without fully letting her guard down. "Thank you," she said simply. "But I still don't know anything about you." "That's fair," he replied with a small smile. "My name's Caleb. I live and work in the area. I know these lands well, and I know how to survive here." You seem like you know how to survive too, but even the strongest people can use a friend sometimes." She considered his words. There was truth in them, undeniable and clear. But there was also a part of her that refused to be completely vulnerable, a part that remained cautious. She had learned early in life that trust was not given lightly, and danger often came disguised as help. "You're brave," Caleb said after a pause, his eyes softening. "And smart. You noticed them before they noticed you. You moved quickly. That's why you're still here." Instead, she studied him, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and wariness.
I don't know why I let you help me," she admitted quietly. "I thought you might hurt me." He nodded slowly, as if he understood completely.
"It's natural to feel that way, and it's okay. You're cautious because your life matters. But today, it worked out differently. I didn't hurt you, and I won't. The woman took a deep breath, feeling the tension in her body slowly ease. The danger had passed, for now, but something about Caleb made her uneasy, in a different way. Not with fear, but with curiosity. She wanted to know more about him, to understand why he had stepped in when others might have walked away.
Where are you going? Caleb asked gently. You don't have to travel alone anymore.
Not if you don't want to. She hesitated, unsure how to answer. The trail ahead was still long, and she had nowhere particular to go, but the idea of having someone to watch her back, someone to help her navigate the dangers of the desert, was tempting. I'm not sure, she admitted. I have to reach the next settlement, but the path is dangerous. Caleb nodded. Then I'll go with you. We'll travel together, and I'll make sure no one harms you. She studied him carefully, measuring his sincerity against the fear that still lingered in her chest. Slowly, she lowered her guard just enough to nod.
All right,
she said, her voice steady.
But one wrong move and I'll defend myself. He smiled faintly, respecting her boundaries. Understood.
I wouldn't expect anything less. As they began walking together along the dusty trail, the Apache woman felt a mix of fear and cautious hope. The desert stretched endlessly before them, but for the first time in days, she didn't feel completely alone. She still didn't fully trust Caleb, but she knew that, for now, she could rely on him to watch her back. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. The wind whispered through the cliffs, carrying the scent of distant rain and the promise of night. And as they walked side by side, both of them aware of the unspoken bond beginning to form. The Apache woman realized that her journey had taken a turn she had not anticipated. She had faced danger, and she had survived. But more importantly, she had found someone she could, perhaps cautiously, begin to trust. The first night after the encounter passed quietly, though not without tension. The Apache woman, though wary, accepted the small shelter Caleb had helped her find behind a natural rock formation. It was not much, but it offered protection from the wind that swept the desert plains and the chill that came with nightfall. Caleb had built a small fire using dry brush and twigs he had gathered, the flames flickering and casting long, dancing shadows across the rocks. She sat slightly apart from the fire, wrapped in a blanket she had carried, her eyes scanning the darkness beyond the light. Caleb worked nearby, arranging stones around the fire to keep it contained. Every movement he made seemed deliberate, careful, showing respect for her presence and her space. But though her initial fear had begun to fade, a part of her remained alert. She had spent her life learning that danger could appear in the least expected form, often disguised as help or friendship.
Do you need water?
Caleb asked gently, glancing at her from across the fire. His voice was calm, steady, and reassuring. She shook her head. I have enough, she said, her tone soft but firm. She did not yet trust him enough to accept more from him than necessary, but she appreciated the gesture. The fire crackled between them, filling the silence, and for a moment, they simply watched it together.
The Apache woman studied Caleb carefully. He was different from anyone she had ever met.
He did not act superior, though he was clearly capable and strong. He did not speak down to her or assume she needed his protection beyond what she truly did. There was a quiet honesty in the way he moved and the way he looked at her, a respect that seemed rare among men she had encountered before. You are skilled, Caleb said after a while, breaking the silence. I noticed how you handled yourself back there on the trail. Most would have panicked. Breaths, Her hands tightened slightly around the blanket. "I have to survive," she said quietly. "But fear is not an option. I cannot rely on anyone but myself."
"I understand. You have lived a hard life and learned quickly."
"That is something to respect, not challenge." His eyes softened as he spoke, and she felt a small flicker of something unfamiliar. Curiosity, maybe even cautious hope. The wind picked up outside, whistling through the rocky formations and carrying the distant cry of a coyote. The firelight danced across their faces, revealing the lines of determination etched into hers and the rugged weariness on his.
She realized then that Caleb, too, had survived hardships perhaps more than most people would have expected. "I've traveled these lands a long time," he said, after a pause.
"Best. I know which trails are safe, which areas to avoid, and how to find water and shelter when it seems none exists. You've done well to come this far on your own." Bay. For the first time, she felt a subtle shift in her fear, a recognition that he could be trusted, at least enough to accept his guidance. Still, she remained cautious.
"And yet you chose to follow me," she said softly. "You did not need to."
"Why?" Caleb looked down at the fire, then back at her. Because no one deserves to face danger alone if it can be avoided," he replied.
"I could help. I could not stand by and do nothing." The Apache woman's eyes narrowed slightly, trying to read him, to find any hidden motive behind his words.
But there was none. He spoke with honesty, and she felt it deep down, though a part of her still hesitated to accept it fully. The night stretched on, and the desert became colder. Caleb suggested they take turns keeping watch, though she insisted she could manage on her own. He did not argue, instead quietly agreeing to let her maintain her independence while still staying close enough to intervene if necessary. That balance between caution and trust was new to her, and it was strangely comforting. As dawn approached, a soft pink light touched the horizon, slowly replacing the darkness with the promise of a new day. Caleb stirred, collecting a few small pieces of firewood to keep the flame alive. The Apache woman rose as well, stretching her tired limbs, and for a moment they simply watched the sun rise over the desert. "Where will you go today?" Caleb asked as he prepared a small breakfast of dried meat and bread. "I need to reach the next settlement," she said. "I cannot stay here for long." Her voice was firm, but there was an undertone of uncertainty. The desert was vast, and traveling alone was dangerous, yet the thought of being accompanied by Caleb brought an unfamiliar sense of reassurance. Bah. He handed her a piece of bread, and she hesitated before taking it. "You should eat," he said gently. "You need your strength. There are miles to cover, and the trail will not be easy." Reluctantly, she accepted it, and they ate in silence, the crackle of the fire the only sound between them. Though she did not speak much, she observed him carefully, noticing the care with which he moved, the respect he showed for both her and the land around them. Something in his presence made her feel safer, though she was careful not to let herself rely on that feeling too quickly. They set out together, traveling along a narrow trail that wound through rocky canyons and over dry riverbeds. The Apache woman moved with quiet grace, her eyes constantly scanning for signs of danger. Caleb followed closely, always alert, always watchful, his hand occasionally brushing against the rifle slung across his back. As the day progressed, they began to talk more. She told him small details about her travels, about the lands she had crossed, and the skills she had learned from her family and tribe. Caleb listened attentively, never interrupting, showing genuine interest in her words. He shared stories of his own life, carefully chosen, revealing just enough to show that he too had faced hardship and learned to survive Despite herself, the Apache woman began to feel a growing sense of connection. She realized that Caleb was not just a stranger who had saved her life. He was someone who could understand her struggles, someone who respected her strength without trying to overshadow it, bear it. Yet she remained cautious, knowing that trust was earned, not given freely. The trail led them to a narrow gorge, the walls of stone rising high on either side. The path was treacherous, with loose rocks that could shift underfoot and narrow ledges that demanded careful balance. The Apache woman led the way, confident and sure, with Caleb following close behind. At one point, a rock shifted under her foot and she lost her balance for a moment. Caleb's hand shot out instinctively, catching her just in time. For a heartbeat, their eyes met, and she felt something stir inside her. Gratitude, respect, and something else she could not yet name. She pulled back slightly, reminding herself that she could not afford to become vulnerable. Not yet. But the thought of traveling alone again seemed suddenly unbearable. As they emerged from the gorge, the landscape opened up into a wide plain. The wind blew gently across the desert, carrying the scent of distant flowers and the faint sound of flowing water. They paused to rest, sitting on a flat rock and taking in the view. "You're a remarkable woman," Caleb said softly, his voice filled with admiration. "Most people would have panicked in the gorge, but you handled it with skill and grace."
"I do what I must to survive," she said quietly. "I do what I must to survive."
She said quietly, "Bah, I cannot afford weakness." "I know," he replied, nodding, "and yet even the strongest people need help sometimes. There is no shame in that." She considered his words, the truth of them sinking in slowly. She had spent so much of her life relying only on herself, believing that any dependence on another person was dangerous. And yet, here was Caleb, offering help without demanding anything in return, showing respect and understanding in a way she had never experienced before. Their journey continued, the miles passing slowly under the relentless sun. They shared stories, laughter, and occasional silence, the bond between them growing with every step. The Apache woman began to feel a sense of trust forming, small but undeniable. She still remained cautious, but she realized that for the first time in a long while, she did not feel completely alone. As evening approached, they found another sheltered spot for the night, this time near a small, hidden stream. The sound of running water was soothing, and the Apache woman allowed herself a moment of relaxation, washing her hands and face. Caleb prepared a simple meal, and they ate together, the conversation flowing more easily than before. For the first time since they met, the Apache woman allowed herself to consider that perhaps not all men were dangerous, that perhaps trust could be earned, and that perhaps Caleb was different. She still did not know what the future held, but for now she felt a cautious hope that the journey ahead might be easier with him by her side. As they settled down to sleep, the fire casting a warm glow on their surroundings, the Apache woman reflected on the events of the past 2 days. She had faced danger, survived, and found an unexpected ally in Caleb. Though fear still lingered, it was tempered by a growing sense of trust, respect, and something deeper she could not yet name. And as the desert night stretched around them, she realized that her journey was no longer just about survival. It was also about learning to trust, to accept help, and to open her heart even just a little to the possibility of companionship. The days that followed were long and filled with challenges, but they were also days that slowly began to change the nature of the relationship between the Apache woman and Caleb. The desert, once a lonely and dangerous expanse, now became a shared space where trust and understanding began to grow. Each step of their journey tested their endurance, their courage, and their ability to rely on one another. The morning air was cool, carrying the scent of sand and sage, as the two set out along a winding trail that led toward the distant settlement she needed to reach. The Apache woman led with confidence, her eyes sharp, scanning for any signs of danger. Caleb followed closely behind, careful not to crowd her, but always near enough to assist if needed. She had grown used to his presence, the quiet reassurance that he offered without pressing herself into dependence on him. Along the trail, they encountered several small challenges that tested their skills. Loose stones made footing treacherous, and sharp cacti lined parts of the path. A sudden gust of wind threatened to blow sand into their eyes, and at one point a small rock slide blocked their way. Caleb quickly assessed the situation, moving to help clear the path while the Apache woman used her agility and knowledge of the land to guide them safely around the obstacles. Through these shared challenges, a subtle bond began to take shape. She noticed the way he observed the land, how carefully he moved, and how he seemed to anticipate danger before it even appeared. She, in turn, demonstrated her own skill and resourcefulness, earning his quiet admiration. There were moments when their eyes met briefly, a shared understanding passing between them, and she felt a strange sense of comfort in his presence. As the sun rose higher in the sky, they paused for a brief rest near a small cluster of rocks that offered shade. Caleb produced water from his pack and handed it to her. She hesitated, then took it, feeling a growing awareness that he respected her independence while still offering support.
"You move like you belong here," Caleb remarked, his voice calm.
"It's not just the land. It's the way you read it, how you respond to it. You're remarkable." She glanced at him, a faint smile touching her lips, though her eyes remained cautious. "I've had to learn," she said softly. "The desert doesn't forgive mistakes."
You learn quickly, or you don't survive. He nodded, respecting her words.
"I can see that. You've survived on your own for a long time, and it shows." "I've met many people who never learned that kind of skill." There was a quiet pause between them, filled only by the gentle rustle of the wind and the distant cries of birds circling overhead. For the first time in a long while, she felt a measure of ease. She did not fully trust him yet, but she realized that trust was no longer a distant idea. It was beginning to form, fragile but present. As they continued their journey, the trail led them to a narrow canyon, the walls of stone rising high on either side. The path was uneven, with loose rocks threatening to shift underfoot. A sudden misstep caused her to stumble, and Caleb reacted instinctively, catching her by the arm and steadying her.
"Careful," he said, his voice steady though there was a faint note of concern. "The rocks here are tricky."
Her heartbeat quickened, not from fear but from the proximity of his hand, the awareness of his presence so close.
She nodded, regaining her balance. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice betraying the faintest tremor. They moved slowly through the canyon, careful with each step, but also aware of the unspoken connection that seemed to grow with every shared challenge. The Apache woman found herself observing him in ways she had not expected. He was capable, cautious, and attentive, not just to the dangers of the land, but to her as well. He offered help when necessary, but never in a way that made her feel weak or dependent. By the afternoon, the desert opened up into a wide plain dotted with scrub and small wildflowers. They paused again, this time to rest and eat a light meal. "Brass, brass, brass." Caleb set down a small bundle of food, and she hesitated before accepting it. "You need to eat," he said gently. "The sun is strong, and we have miles to cover." She took a piece of bread, grateful but still cautious. "I know," she replied simply. "I will." As they ate, their conversation turned to stories of the land. Caleb spoke of the animals he had observed, the hidden water sources he had discovered, and the lessons he had learned from living in the desert. Rask. She listened intently, offering her own insights and corrections where appropriate, and he welcomed her perspective with genuine interest. There was a growing respect between them, not just for each other's skills, but for each other's character. But she began to realize that Caleb was not just a man who had saved her life. He was someone who could understand her, appreciate her strength, and walk beside her without diminishing her independence. The afternoon brought a sudden challenge. Dark clouds gathered quickly, an unusual desert storm forming on the horizon. Wind picked up, carrying sand and dust, and the temperature began to drop. Caleb and the Apache woman searched for shelter, finally finding a small overhang in the rocks that offered partial protection. The storm hit with force, rain pelting the rocks and sending rivulets of water rushing down the canyon. The Apache woman shivered, and Caleb moved to drape his blanket over her shoulders. She hesitated, then accepted it, realizing that she could allow herself this small comfort without losing her strength. "We'll wait it out here," Caleb said, his voice calm above the storm. "The rain won't last forever, and it's safer to stay put than to risk the trail." They huddled together under the rock overhang, listening to the sound of the storm and feeling a sense of shared endurance. Apache woman realized that for the first time she felt a connection with someone that went beyond mere survival. She felt respect, trust, and a faint, unspoken warmth that was difficult to name. By the time the storm passed, the sky had cleared and the desert was bathed in a soft golden light. The air smelled fresh and clean, and the land glistened from the recent rain. They resumed their journey, their pace slower now, both appreciating the quiet beauty around them. As evening approached, they reached the outskirts of a small settlement. The Apache woman felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She had managed to reach her destination, but the thought of interacting with outsiders again brought tension. Caleb walked beside her, a silent reassurance, respecting her space while remaining close enough to offer support if needed. The settlement was cautious in its welcome. Vast. Outsiders rarely traveled through, and an Apache woman alone was an uncommon sight. The people watched from doorways and windows, curious and wary. Caleb did not hesitate. He walked beside her openly, speaking to the townspeople when necessary, ensuring that she was treated with respect and safety. The Apache woman noticed his quiet confidence, the way he handled the situation with dignity and calm. She felt a growing admiration for him, a recognition that his strength was not just in his skill with the land or weapons, but in his character, his ability to protect without dominating. That evening, as they prepared a small camp on the outskirts of the settlement, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought of the past days, the danger she had faced, the challenges of the desert, and the unexpected support of Caleb. She realized that her perception of him had changed completely. What had started as caution and suspicion had slowly transformed into trust and something deeper. For his part, Caleb observed her quietly, noting the way she moved, the careful consideration in her actions, and the strength that radiated from her.
He felt a growing admiration, a recognition that she was unlike anyone he had ever met.
She was independent, courageous, and intelligent, yet there was a subtle softness beneath her strength that made him want to protect her, not out of dominance, but out of respect and care. The night fell, and they sat together near a small fire, the settlement quiet around them. The Apache woman wrapped herself in her blanket, feeling a warmth that was both physical and emotional. She glanced at Caleb, who was arranging the firewood, and felt a sense of gratitude that went beyond words. "You've been good to me," she said softly, almost as if testing the words. "Better than I expected anyone could be." Caleb looked at her, his eyes meeting hers. "And you've earned it," he replied gently. "Your strength, your courage, the way you face life, it commands respect. I would be honored to walk beside you." She considered his words, the truth of them sinking in slowly. Breath. She realized that trust was not weakness, and accepting help did not make her less capable. The bond they had formed was not just about survival. It was about understanding, respect, and a growing connection that neither of them could ignore. As they settled down to rest, the Apache woman allowed herself a rare moment of peace. The desert, once a lonely and dangerous place, had become a shared journey. And though challenges still lay ahead, she knew that for the first time she was not facing them alone. Their shared experiences, the trials of the journey, and the growing trust between them had transformed the nature of their relationship. What had begun as cautious suspicion had evolved into a bond built on mutual respect, understanding, and a sense of companionship that neither had expected but both had come to rely upon. And as the night stretched on, the Apache woman realized that she no longer feared being alone. She had found someone she could trust, someone who respected her strength and independence, and someone who had proven that true companionship was possible even in the harshest of landscapes. The days following their arrival at the small settlement were filled with preparation, caution, and careful planning. The Apache woman and Caleb both understood that the journey had only partially ended. Though they had navigated the treacherous desert and survived storms and wild terrain, other dangers still lingered. Dangers from people who might see her as vulnerable, and dangers from those who did not understand or accept their alliance. Early one morning they set out from the settlement to continue a safer path toward her family lands. The sun rose slowly, painting the desert with soft shades of orange and gold. The Apache woman walked ahead, her eyes scanning the horizon, alert and cautious as always. Caleb followed behind, his presence steady and reassuring, watching both her and the surrounding land for any signs of trouble. As they traveled, the conversation between them flowed easily, filled with laughter and quiet moments of reflection. The Apache woman spoke of her family, her upbringing, and the lessons she had learned about survival and independence. Caleb shared stories of his own life, of the hardships he had endured, and of the values he held dear: honesty, courage, and loyalty. Each story strengthened their bond, showing them how much they had in common despite their different backgrounds. They came upon a rocky plateau overlooking a wide valley, and they paused to rest. The view stretched endlessly, a breathtaking panorama of desert and sky. Caleb knelt beside a small spring, filling their water bottles while the Apache woman sat on a rock, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She felt a sense of peace she had rarely experienced before, the calm of having someone she could rely on beside her. "You've changed my journey," she said softly, almost to herself. "I thought I would have to face all of this alone." Caleb glanced at her, a small, gentle smile on his face. "You've never been alone," he said. "You're strong, yes, but even the strongest people need someone they can trust. We all do." She considered his words, letting them sink in. Trust had always been difficult for her. Her life had been built on independence and caution, and yet here was Caleb, showing her that trust could exist without fear, that companionship could be both safe and enriching. Their rest was short-lived. A distant shout carried over the wind, sharp and urgent. Caleb's hand moved instinctively to the rifle at his side. "Stay close," he whispered, his eyes scanning the valley below. From the far edge of the plateau, a group of men emerged, moving quickly toward them. The Apache woman's heart raced, her mind immediately analyzing the situation. These were not just travelers. They were aggressive, possibly dangerous, intent on confronting her. "Bed." She looked to Caleb, whose expression was calm but determined. He stepped forward slightly, positioning himself protectively between her and the approaching men. "Bed."
"We'll handle this together," he said quietly. "Stay behind me." She nodded, feeling a mixture of fear and determination.
She had faced danger before, but now she realized that having Caleb by her side changed everything. They were no longer alone. They could face threats as a team. The men came closer, shouting challenges and demands. Caleb's voice rang out, firm and commanding, warning them to stop. Best. When they refused, he moved quickly and decisively, his actions precise and measured. The Apache woman followed his lead, using her knowledge of the terrain and her quick reflexes to help defend their position. The confrontation was tense but brief. The men, realizing they were outmatched and facing determined opponents, backed away and retreated. The Apache woman exhaled slowly, relief flooding her body. She looked at Caleb, her heart swelling with gratitude and a growing admiration for his courage and skill. "You saved us again," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion.
We saved each other, he replied gently, his eyes meeting hers.
That's how it should be. The words resonated deeply with her. She realized that their bond had grown beyond trust and respect. It had become something deeper, a connection that was mutual and undeniable. She no longer saw him as a stranger. She saw him as a partner, a protector, and someone who cared for her in a way that was sincere and unwavering. As the day progressed, they continued their journey, navigating the desert with renewed determination. The Apache woman felt a growing sense of confidence, knowing that she was no longer facing the challenges alone. Caleb's presence was a constant reassurance, and their teamwork was seamless, each anticipating the other's actions, each understanding the unspoken signals that had developed between them over the days of travel. By late afternoon, they reached a hidden valley that offered a safe place to rest for the night. Caleb helped her set up a small camp, gathering firewood and preparing a simple meal. The Apache woman allowed herself to relax for the first time in days, feeling the tension in her body ease as she sat near the fire, watching the flames dance. "You've taught me a lot," she said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. "About survival, about trust, about how to let someone in without losing myself." Caleb looked at her, his expression soft. "And you've taught me about courage, resilience, and the strength of someone who refuses to give up. You're remarkable." Their eyes met, and for a moment the world seemed to shrink around them, leaving only the two of them by the fire. The Apache woman felt a warmth in her chest, a realization that her heart had begun to trust and care in a way she had not expected. Bound. Caleb felt the same, recognizing that his admiration had deepened into something far more profound, a desire to protect, to stand by her, and to build a future together. As night fell, the stars emerged in the clear desert sky, brilliant and endless. They sat together, sharing stories and quiet laughter, the bond between them stronger than ever. The Apache woman realized that the journey they had shared had transformed her, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. She had faced danger, trusted someone, and discovered a connection that was both comforting and exhilarating. In the days that followed, the two continued their journey toward her family lands, Burris. They traveled carefully, avoiding known dangers and taking advantage of hidden paths and water sources. Their teamwork was seamless, each action coordinated and intuitive. The Apache woman found herself relying on Caleb in ways she had never imagined, while Caleb respected her independence and strength, never seeking to dominate or control. Finally, they reached the edge of her family's territory. The sight of familiar land, trees, and distant dwellings filled her with relief and anticipation. Caleb walked beside her, silent but supportive, understanding that this moment was significant for her. Her family greeted her with a mixture of surprise, concern, and joy. They had feared for her safety, knowing the dangers she might face alone. Caleb introduced himself respectfully, and her family observed him closely, recognizing his skill, honesty, and the care he had shown their daughter. Their respect grew as they saw how she trusted him and how naturally they worked together. That evening, after ensuring her safety and sharing news of their journey, Caleb spoke quietly to the Apache woman. I have a question, he said gently. I know we've faced danger together, and I know the bond we've formed is strong, but I want to ask if you would honor me by becoming my wife. I want to stand by you, protect you, and share my life with you. The Apache woman felt her heart quicken. She had spent so much of her life relying only on herself, guarding her heart and trusting few. Yet here was Caleb, offering not just protection, but love, respect, and partnership. She considered the journey they had shared, the dangers, the storms, the quiet moments, and the growing trust. She realized that her feelings had changed, that she no longer feared letting someone in. Slowly, she nodded, tears of relief and joy welling in her eyes.
Yes, she whispered. I will marry you. Caleb's face lit up with a gentle, proud smile.
Bet. Then I promise you, he said softly, taking her hand. I will stand by you always. I will protect you, respect you, and honor you every day of our lives. Great. The Apache woman felt a deep sense of peace and happiness, a warmth she had never known before. She realized that her life, once marked by solitude and caution, had been transformed by trust, courage, and love. Together, they would face the future, stronger and more united than they had ever been apart. The marriage ceremony was simple but meaningful. Friends and family gathered, honoring both her heritage and the life she and Caleb had built together. There was joy, laughter, and a shared recognition of the strength and resilience that had brought them together. Their union was not just a celebration of love, but a testament to courage, trust, and the bonds that can form when two people meet under extraordinary circumstances. In the days that followed, they settled into their life together, navigating challenges and joys as a team. The Apache woman found comfort in Caleb's steadfastness, while he found inspiration in her strength and intelligence. They shared responsibilities, decisions, and dreams, their partnership built on mutual respect, understanding, and love. Looking back, the Apache woman reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the danger she had faced, the trust she had learned to give, and the bond that had grown from necessity into love. She understood now that life's greatest challenges could also bring its greatest blessings, and that courage, trust, and respect could lead to a happiness she had never imagined possible. Together they faced the world, side by side, ready for whatever challenges or joys lay ahead, bound by love, trust, and the unbreakable bond they had forged in the harsh but beautiful desert.